They tied her to a post, barefoot, bleeding, with twin daughters crying at her feet, her crime, birthing girls, nothing more. But just when the world left her to die in silence, a quiet man rode by. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask for permission. He just said 4 words that changed everything. "You're coming with me." What followed isn't just a rescue. It's a story about choosing love, rebuilding worth, and finding a home no one can take. Stay with us because the ending might just rewrite your idea of family. The road didn't end, it vanished. One moment there was trail, the next just wind and silence. No sign, no marker. Only 2 crooked fence posts leaning like broken bones, and a path so faint it seemed ashamed to exist. The land beyond was dust and wilderness, where even the sun looked weary behind a veil of yellow grit. It wasn't the kind of place a man passed through. It was where people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. That's where Cole Bennett rode alone, wrapped in a coat older than memory rifle strapped across his back, and a silence clinging to him like a second skin. His mare moved slow, picking her own path. Cole didn't push her. He hadn't spoken in days, not even to the horse. Words didn't come cheap out here. You saved them for something that mattered. The air had a weight to it that afternoon. Not the heaviness of heat or cold, but the kind that came before something changed. Cole felt it, though he couldn't have said how. A shift in the wind. A bird that stopped singing. A stillness that made you feel like you were being watched even when you weren't. Then he heard it. At first, it could have been the wind, just a hitch, a tremor in the air. But it came again, barely louder than a breath. A sound too thin to be a cry, too human to be ignored. He reined in the mare and tilted his head. Nothing. Then clearer this time, a soft, broken whimper. Not 1, but 2. Infant. Cole dismounted his boots, pressing into the frost-hardened soil with the slow certainty of someone who'd seen too much and didn't flinch easily. He left the rifle on the saddle. If danger waited out here, it wasn't going to be met with bullets. He followed the sound. Past the ruins of a cattle fence, through the twisted remains of what might have once been a garden, now nothing but dry thistle and ash. The scent of neglect clung to everything, old rust pine tar smoke that had long since faded but still left its shadow. Then he saw her. She was tied upright to a splintered post, arms wrenched behind her back, head slumped forward. Blood crusted along her temple. Her dress, torn at the sleeve, hung like a rag. Her feet were bare. Her dark hair clung to her face in snarled ropes, masking half of her features. Her body didn't stir. But her eyes were open. Vacant. Glassy. Not dead, not yet, but not far off. At her feet, wrapped in a worn saddle blanket, lay 2 tiny bundles. They didn't scream. They whimpered, weak, almost apologetic. Twin girls. One blinked up at the sky with the dull confusion of new life. The other sucked the corner of the cloth like she'd already learned hope was a dangerous thing. Cole didn't speak. He crouched slowly, watching the woman's chest rise and fall, shallow like a flicker of flame that could be snuffed by a single gust. Her lips moved, cracked, bleeding. A sound escaped dry, barely there. "Don't take them." It wasn't a plea. It was a command from someone who'd already lost everything else and was willing to give up herself if it meant saving what little remained. Cole said nothing. He drew his knife not quickly, not as a threat, but with a reverence that made the moment feel like a prayer. He cut the rope around her wrists. Her arms dropped like dead weight. She swayed once, then collapsed forward. He caught her before she hit the dirt. She weighed nothing. Not just in body, but in presence. Like whatever part of her had once carried fight had already slipped away. He looked down the slope. An old house, half collapsed, sat smoking from the chimney. Still warm. Someone had been there recently. Whoever tied her up hadn't gone far or long. He didn't hesitate. He gathered the girls first, wrapping them in his own coat, pressing their fragile bodies against his chest. Then he bent, slid his arms under the woman's back and knees, and lifted her like something already half broken. "You're coming with me," he said. Not loud, not firm, just true. Like it had already been written in the dust before he ever arrived. The walk back was long. Snow had begun to fall, slow, silent flakes that landed without a sound, the kind of snow that erased footprints and stories alike. Cole walked beside the mare, his coat open, the girl's tucked against his ribs. The woman's head lolled against his shoulder. Her breath was barely there. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had swallowed the land whole. His home stood quiet among the trees, a single-room shelter made of pine logs and patience. The chimney smoked faintly. The door creaked on its hinge as he pushed it open with a shoulder. Warmth met them like a memory. Inside, he laid the woman gently on his cot, her face turned toward the fire, though her eyes remained closed. He checked her for bleeding, more bruises than wounds, more sorrow than blood. Her ankles were raw, one eye swelling shut. The bodice of her dress torn, but he looked away. Dignity, even now. He pulled a quilt over her, tucked it beneath her chin. Then he moved to the fire, stoked it higher, set water to boil. From a tin, he pulled the last of the goat's milk, warmed it in 2 small jars, mixed it with rainwater. The girls drank like they'd been waiting for something they didn't believe would ever come. When they slept, he laid them side by side in a crate lined with wool. He covered them with his shirt. He didn't sleep. Cole sat beside the fire boots, still on hands resting on his knees. He watched the woman's chest rise, then fall, then rise again. He didn't know her name, didn't know what storm had blown her here. But he knew the look in her eyes when he found her. Not fear, not shame, just surrender. The kind that comes after you've been let down too many times to hope. Outside, the snow thickened. The world quieted. Inside, the fire didn't go out, and neither did he. Not tonight. Not with them here, not with something finally worth staying awake for. Mira awoke to the soft crackle of firewood and the scent of pine smoke and warm cotton. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The last thing she remembered was the wind on her face, the cold in her bones, and her daughters crying helpless in that dying place. Now there was warmth. A cradle of sorts sat by a modest hearth. 2 tiny bundles tucked in what looked like a man's flannel shirt slept soundly. Her arms ached, her head throbbed, but her daughters were breathing, and so was she. A figure moved nearby. She tensed until she saw him quiet, broad-shouldered, kneeling near the stove with a cloth in hand. He wasn't looking at her. He tended the fire like it was a sacred thing. "You didn't leave us," she whispered. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. The man looked up, startled. His face was sun-worn with a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. His eyes were dark, but not unkind. "No," he said simply. She tried to sit up. Pain flared in her ribs. They said, I wasn't worth feeding. Said daughters don't bring dowry, that I should have died giving birth. He didn't reply at first, just dipped the cloth into a basin of warm water and brought it to her. She took it with trembling hands and pressed it to her cheek. "You're not afraid," she asked, "of what they'll say. A man like you, taking in a woman like me." "I'm Cole," he said, "that's all." Then he stood and stoked the fire again. The days blurred after that, not with drama but with recovery. Mira learned Cole's rhythms, how he rose before sunrise to feed the fire, how he stepped outside when she nursed the twins, how he never knocked on the door but always paused before entering. He didn't ask questions, didn't pry. His silence wasn't the kind that judged. It held space like he understood the words would come when they were ready. Mira found herself doing things she hadn't done in weeks, folding linens, humming under her breath, brushing her hair. Her voice was careful, like a bird relearning flight. One morning, she stepped outside to find him shaping wood beside the shed, long pieces of pine smoothed under his hands. "What's that?" she asked. He didn't answer, just kept working. Later, when she entered the cabin after feeding the girls, she saw it. A cradle. Hand-carved, sanded smooth with notches etched in the side like someone counting time. She ran her fingers over the edge. No one had ever made something for her without wanting something back. She didn't cry. She just picked up her daughters, placed them inside, and stood still for a long time, listening to the fire. Later that day, she found an old loom in the corner of the storage shed, dusty, forgotten. Her hands, still sore, moved instinctively. She began to weave. She didn't know what yet, only that it would be for the twins. They were building something here, stitch by stitch, even if they didn't say it out loud. Spring had not yet come, but the days were lighter. The snow receded from the edge of the porch, and crows cawed less like omens. Mira's bruises faded from purple to soft yellow. Her back straightened. Her hands steadied. Cole didn't speak of change, but he left things on the windowsill, a spool of thread, a jar of molasses, a new comb. His way of saying, "You belong here." Then, one morning, as Mira bent near the well with a bucket in hand, she heard a voice, sharp, clipped, and familiar. "Well," the woman said, "you look far too alive for someone who was supposed to be buried." Mira turned. There stood Mrs. Callahan, widow, gossip-monger, keeper of moral balances no one asked her to weigh. Her mule, festooned with red saddle trim, snorted beside her. "I brought jam," Callahan said, though it tasted more like vinegar than berries. Inside, the girls' clothes hung drying on the line. "You know," Miss Mira Callahan added in a voice dipped in sweetness and judgment, "the town's wondering what kind of woman ends up living out here with a man like that, and 2 babes with no name." Mira stood her ground. "My name is Mira. A name doesn't mean much without a ring," Callahan said, and smiled like she'd won something. Later, when Cole returned and saw the tension in Mira's hands, he didn't ask. He just took the bucket from her and fixed the broken porch hinge. "They'll never stop reminding me I don't belong," she said that night by the fire. "You do," he answered without looking up. "Not to this town, not anywhere." "I don't answer to towns," Cole said softly, "but the wind changed that week, and 3 riders came." Mira saw them first from the kitchen window, Matthew, her late husband's brother, and 2 of his cousins, all in worn coats and with rifles slung. She froze. The twins stirred in their cradle. Cole was already stepping onto the porch when they reached the clearing. "That woman inside belongs to our family," Matthew said. "And those girls carry our name." "She's not yours," Cole replied. "She's not something to claim." Matthew's jaw clenched. "We don't want trouble, just what's ours." "Then your brother should have stayed alive," Cole said, voice even as stone. Tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Cole stepped forward, hands empty. "You ride out now, or I bury 3 more before supper." The men stared, then turned, retreated into mist. Inside, Mira sat frozen. "I didn't ask you to fight for me," she whispered. "I didn't do it for you," Cole replied. "I did it because no one should ever have to beg to be left alone." The wind had quieted, but something stirred inside her. Mira stood barefoot on the porch one morning watching the first light stretch across the distant ridgeline. Her daughters, now pink-cheeked and stronger, cooed in the cradle Cole had built with his hands. Snow still lingered in the shadows beneath the pines, but spring was close. You could hear it in the distant drip of melting ice and smell it in the earth waking up beneath the cabin. Then the letter arrived. The mule came up the trail just before noon, ridden by a red-faced clerk with one torn glove and an envelope pressed against his chest. Cole met him outside, took the letter, tipped his hat, and said nothing. Mira read it at the table, while the fire hummed softly behind her. It was from her cousin in Boise, her mother's side. They hadn't spoken in years. The letter was formal, careful, but kind. Her grandfather had died. There was land, a house, a small inheritance, enough to live without fear, a room of her own, a nursemaid, a new name for the girls, comfort, security, and no ghosts. When she finished reading, Mira stared at the envelope as if it might burst into flame. Cole didn't speak. He never asked. Just read it once when she handed it to him, then folded it neatly and gave it back. His face changed only slightly. His eyes grew quieter, his jaw a little tighter. He stepped outside, saddled her mare, packed a bundle of bread, cheese, water, and a spare wool blanket. "You'll be all right," he said, gently placing it beside her satchel. She looked up. "And you?" He nodded toward the trees. "I was all right before. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't guilt. It was the kind of honesty that came from years of silence, words spoken only when they carried weight. You're not going to stop me." Cole shook his head. "Was never my place." The twins napped beside her, one with a thumb in her mouth, the other curled into a half fist as if ready to punch the world. "They like it here," Mira whispered. "They'll like wherever you are," he replied. She stood slowly, her knees uncertain. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last. At the porch's edge, she turned. "Do you want me to go?" Cole's face cracked, not with weakness but with truth. "I want you to stay," he said, "but only if that's what you want." Her breath caught. "And if I do," he took a step forward, not rushed, not desperate, just present. "I'll build you a life," he said. "A quiet one. One you don't have to survive." Her satchel slipped from her shoulder, hitting the floorboards with a soft, final thump. He looked down at the twins. "You've got daughters who need a man that watches over them like sunrise and supper. And I've got hands that didn't do nothing good until you gave them something to build." Mira laughed through tears. Her shoulders shook. He stepped toward her again, a heat in his chest, not the kind that scorched, but the kind that warmed. "I don't have a ring," he murmured, "but I've got a home that knows your name, and a fire that waits for your hands to stoke it." She didn't hesitate. She walked into his arms, not timid, not uncertain, like a woman who finally believed she belonged. 3 days later, they were married beneath the old pine tree behind the cabin. The preacher was from Lolo, hard of hearing, and needed Mira to repeat her vows twice. She didn't mind. She said them stronger the second time. Mrs. Callahan came, half out of protest, half out of stubborn curiosity. She brought pickled beets and a bundle of lavender. Mira accepted them with grace, never once glancing at the old gossip's raised eyebrows. Cole didn't say anything fancy. He didn't need to. He just looked at Mira like she was the only thing left that made sense and said quietly, "I choose you. Every day, even the hard ones." The twins gurgled during the kiss. The pine trees bowed slightly in the wind. That night, they sat on the porch. Cole, with his boots off, legs stretched out, and hands behind his head. Mira, cross-legged beside him, one baby in her lap, the other dozing at her feet. "You never asked me what I wanted," she said softly. Cole turned to her. "No one ever did." She smiled. "I want days that aren't loud, bread that rises, girls who don't learn to shrink, and a man who doesn't make me earn safety." He nodded. "Then that's what we'll build." The fire inside the cabin burned low and steady. Somewhere in the woods a coyote howled and got no answer. Mira began weaving again, this time not just blankets, but memories. Her daughters grew. They learned to crawl, then walk. Cole taught them to feed the hens and balance on fence rails. Mira sang to them with a voice she hadn't known she still had. She didn't forget what came before, but it stopped defining her. One evening, she took out a carving knife and etched something into the beam by the cabin door. Not the girls' names, not Cole's, just her own, Mira, a name that had once been forgotten, now carved into the place she chose. And so the road that had once disappeared into frost and silence became something else entirely. Not a trail of escape, but a path toward home. Toward a man who never spoke more than he needed, and a woman who finally found the quiet space to become everything she was never allowed to be. A mother, a partner, a person whose presence was not a burden but a blessing. A woman no longer surviving but living. And a fire that never, ever went out. There are stories we hear, and then there are stories we feel, stories that settle in our bones long after the words have faded. Mira and Cole's journey isn't just about survival in the harsh wilderness of Montana. It's about something deeper, the quiet courage it takes to rebuild your life when the world has written you off, and the profound grace of being truly seen, not as a burden, but as a human being worth choosing. It began on a forgotten stretch of earth where even the trail had given up. Cole Bennett, a solitary man, scarred by years of loneliness, stumbled upon what most would have called a tragedy waiting to end a woman. Mira, tied to a post, in the bitter wind, bruised and abandoned by the very people who once called her family. At her feet, 2 newborn daughters cried into the silence, not with rage, but with resignation. But Cole didn't turn away. Without words or questions, he freed her. He didn't ask if she deserved saving. He didn't weigh the burden. He simply said, "You're coming with me," and carried 3 lives into the warmth of his quiet cabin. From that moment on, everything changed, not all at once, but in slow, sacred rhythms. Mira was more ghost than woman when she first arrived. Her body bore wounds, but the deeper injuries lay in her spirit, the kind that come from being told over and over that you are nothing, that your children are curses, that your life has no value. But in Cole's home she found something rare, silence that wasn't empty but patient, eyes that didn't judge but watched without demanding, hands that didn't reach to take but built. He carved a cradle, he warmed milk, he fixed hinges and fetched thread, and never once asked for gratitude. And so Mira began to breathe again. She mended, not just physically, but in ways she never expected. She started weaving first out of habit, then out of hope. The twins, once frail and near forgotten, thrived in the safety of that cabin, growing pink-cheeked and full of life. And though the world outside hadn't changed something inside her, had she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to stay. But peace is rarely permanent in a world that profits off silence. Whispers came from town. Old voices full of judgment. A woman like her with no ring and 2 babies, surely she was trouble. Then came the men who'd left her for dead, her brother-in-law, and cousins riding up the hill with rifles and false claims of honor. Cole faced them alone, unarmed, but unwavering. His words weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. She's not yours. She's not a thing to claim. And for the first time in her life, Mira watched someone draw a line in the dirt and say, "She matters." Still, choice remained. A letter arrived, an offer from a distant cousin in Boise inheritance land, comfort, a clean start. It was everything she thought she once wanted. But when Cole packed her bag without protest, when he saddled her horse and didn't beg her to stay, that's when she knew. Love doesn't demand. It invites. And so she stayed. Not because she had to, but because for the first time in her life she wanted to. Their wedding was small. There were no grand speeches, no gold rings, just a pine tree, a soft breeze, 2 babies squirming in their cradle, and a man who said, "I choose you." Every day, even the hard ones. In time, the cabin became more than shelter. It became Mira's canvas, her sanctuary, her home. She raised her daughters not in fear but in strength. She planted herbs, baked bread, and carved her name into the doorframe not to mark territory but to say, I was here, I lived, and I chose this life. So, what do we learn from this story? We learn that healing doesn't always come wrapped in poetry. Sometimes it's silent, sometimes it's slow, and sometimes it walks beside you in the form of a stranger with rough hands and a kind heart. We learn that being rescued is not the same as being saved. True salvation comes when someone doesn't just lift you out of the cold, but helps you believe you deserve the warmth. We learn that love is not loud. It doesn't arrive with fanfare or declarations. It shows up in the smallest things: a bucket of water carried without asking, a cradle carved without mention, a fire that never goes out. Most of all, we learn that we all deserve to carve our name into something that cannot be taken. In today's world, we're often told we have to earn love, prove our worth, be useful to be seen. But Mira's story tells us otherwise. You are not what was done to you. You are not what they said you were. You are not broken beyond repair. You are someone, and somewhere there is a fire waiting for you. If Mira's journey stirred something in you, if it made you pause, reflect, maybe even tear up, then stay with us. Because stories like this matter, not just for the past they reveal, but for the future they inspire. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in quiet courage, if you believe in second chances, if you believe in building a home, not just a house. Your support gives us the strength to tell the next story, the one waiting just beyond the bend in the trail. So don't scroll away just yet. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment for Mira, or Cole, or for the part of yourself that's still learning how to stay. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can say is simply, "You're coming with me."